Keep in touch with the Wolf Connection podcast on our Instagram handle at the Wolf Connection Pod, or email us your questions, comments, and guest ideas to podcast@wolfconnection.org. Thank you for your support, and howls to you all. Welcome to the Wolf Connection podcast. I'm your host, John Kaufman. So today, Stephen and I get to speak about Oregon wolves, and this is something that we've kind of been tracking down for a while. And really, who better to talk to about this stuff than the biologist for U.S. Fish and Wildlife. She's in the Benfield office. She's been there since 2017, covers a whole swath of animals there: eagles, sage-grouse, bats, and of course, wolves. Coming from Bend, Oregon, is Emily Weidner. Emily, so great to finally get this thing going, get you here on the podcast. How's everything going with you?
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me, and I really appreciate your patience. Things are going really well. It's warm, beautiful, sunny. I have very little to complain about, though. I get out in the field this time of year a little bit more than I typically do, and that keeps my cup full for those days that I'm in the office.
Yeah. Just talk about your background a little bit. I was doing a little bit of research when you were on that panel with Ronan Donovan, and we'll get to that a little bit later on. But you grew up in the Midwest, I believe Iowa, correct? Was biology and wildlife, was this always something that you wanted to do, was a passion of yours? Where did that bug literally sort of nip you and kind of get you into this?
So animals in general have always been a passion. I was 100% that kid that would bring home injured wildlife, injured orphan kittens. We have had so many throughout the past. And so folks in my life always said, you'd be a great veterinarian. And so that was kind of initially where I wanted to go with my life when I was a teenager and didn't know any better. Not that being a veterinarian is bad, but ultimately that wasn't what I wanted. And it's hard to know what you want when you're a teenager. The world is so big. There are so many things you haven't experienced. So I'm glad I waited. But yeah, I grew up in Iowa. And once I graduated high school in 2000, I moved to Colorado almost immediately, like a week after graduation. And I did not do anything related to wildlife there. I worked a few different jobs and I snowboarded at the local resort there. And I stayed in Colorado from 2000 until 2008. And I moved to Northern California to work on a dude ranch, which was fun. Hard work, very fun, very hot in Northern California in the summer. We did a lot of pack trips, which was great. And then moved to Oregon in the fall of 2008, if I remember correctly. It was like an eternity ago. And I also worked at a stables in Central Oregon called Sun River Stables. And there was this person who volunteered at the stables, and he said to me, it'd be an awful waste to not go to college. And until then, I hadn't really thought of going to school at all. In fact, I did so poorly in high school that I thought I was not smart. University/colleges weren't for me. But he and his wife helped me apply for scholarships, and I owe them a huge debt of gratitude for that, because had that not been for those two humans, I don't know where I would have been without that help. It was just kind of like, it came at the right time. It was the right amount of support I needed. And so I went to Central Oregon Community College here in Central Oregon. That's where I started. And I had to pay some debt back for my poor performance in high school. So I started out in like Math 10, which is fractions and decimals. I did end up going through vector calculus, which was good. It proved to me that, I wasn't as, I don't want to say dumb, but as ill-equipped to attend college as I thought I was. And that was also really good. So initially I started out as pre-med. I was really interested in medicine, whether that was nursing or actually becoming a physician. Operating OR doctor, ER doctor really appealed to me. And one day I went out with one of my biology professors to help process an injured bald eagle that he ended up rehabilitating. And that was kind of it. I thought, this is so cool that you can do this with wildlife. And for a period of time, I still had that veterinarian angle, interestingly, that stayed with me. And then another professor told me, I think you would be really interested in wildlife biology. And so I started out at Central Oregon Community College, went to Oregon State University Cascades, which is the four-year college here in Bend. And then I actually transferred to Corvallis to finish my degree in wildlife biology. And the rest is kind of history from there. So I ended up volunteering for a lot of different organizations. And in 2017, I got this job with Fish and Wildlife Service. It was a lot harder than I make it sound, but that is how I ended up here.
Describe the difference for those that are listening too about being, I guess, involved in U.S. Fish and Wildlife as opposed to, because I believe that's all, anybody who's working in the national park system, they are U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Is there a difference, or what is the difference between U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which is federal, as opposed to, say, a biologist, I guess just a regular biologist? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the difference? What's the caveat between like a federal biologist as opposed to, I guess, a park biologist or somebody who's doing something else?
Yeah, so let me see if I think about how best to describe that. So U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our mission is to protect and conserve wildlife and their habitats, basically in perpetuity for folks in the United States. And so we have just a very different mission than the National Park Service does. And that's not a bad or good thing. It's just they're two very different missions. And so the Park Service has to deal with things that I frankly don't know and can't speak very well to, but they have to deal with, visitors, along with wildlife, along with park infrastructure management, that type of thing. And there are different branches of Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'm in the branch that's called Ecological Services. And so our main mission is to enact the Endangered Species Act. And so we do a lot of that. We work with a different branch called Migratory Birds Division. So their job is to, do Migratory Bird Treaty Act stuff, Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act stuff. And so they're just between different federal agencies, very different mandates for what they are, to be doing for folks in the United States, basically. Federal biologists are different from state biologists in that the state manages wildlife as a public trust resource. And we have a somewhat similar mission, but really states manage wildlife. The Forest Service or the Bureau of Land Management manage land. They also do wildlife related things. They have wildlife biologists. And the National Park Service, in a slightly similar vein, they manage their parkland, and those are big things to do. Our mission is specifically to fish and wildlife and their habitats, and we are the only federal agency. I had a great quote from one of our web pages up for a presentation I recently did, and that was one of them, is we are the only federal agency where that is our specific mission. And I think that's really cool.
Wow. I've heard of a special agent in the Fish and Wildlife Department. What does that mean?
Yeah. So special agents are part of our Office of Law Enforcement. And those are the folks that basically, they have a host of things they do that I can't speak very specifically to. But, they do a lot of wildlife trafficking investigations. They are the folks who, if there are poaching incidences of threatened or endangered species, those are the people who are investigating those cases. And so that is their primary job. And they do a myriad other things, right? Like if you go to their webpage and scroll through all of the things that they do, port inspections, another one, right? So yeah, special agents, that is their job. It sounds very cool. It's a cool title, special agent. And so I coordinate with them fairly regularly. For instance, I ask them a lot of questions about eagle feathers. We get random phone calls from our office about people who have inherited ivory. And so I'm constantly asking them questions, and they're very knowledgeable, very helpful. I am forever grateful that we have them as a resource. And that is also a different branch of Fish and Wildlife Service.
So what is your day-to-day really look like for yourself? Because I know you were saying that you're getting out in the field now that the weather's a little bit warmer and things like that. What is your day-to-day or your month-to-month? Does it change during the seasons? What are your jobs, duties, as you're trying to obviously protect all this wildlife that's up there in Oregon?
Yeah, it definitely changes between seasons. Let's see. So sage-grouse keep me busy during the spring. So we do let counts. We help ODFW, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, with their let counts. I've been assigned the same lek for, since I started with Fish and Wildlife Service in 2017. So that's nice to count and actually see numbers increase. So this past year, I think I had the best count I've ever had. It's always neat to go out and see them in the morning. We also do lek flights. So basically, there is an area that the state selects every year to fly in helicopters to count birds on the ground. And that helps us identify new potential lekking areas that might not be used as leks anymore. And those are pretty neat. They're super fun, really good time. And that keeps us busy for most of March and April and into the first part of May. Early mornings too, because sage-grouse don't keep bank hours, right? Which is something I always remind people, like, depending on what you want to study, if you're not a night person, I would not recommend you study bats. Or if you don't like hiking, definitely do not study mountain goats. And so it's always nice when you have an animal that's a 9-to-5er. And so, I have to basically divvy up my time between what my obligations are in the office and what I need to be doing in the field. And so if I have a high priority deadline, I have to forego field time in order to meet that deadline, whether that's writing a policy document or commenting on a development or any variety of things. And so basically those things come first and then field time comes second. And so I try to get all the desk type of work done before I go to the field so I don't have that specter of a deadline hanging over my shoulder. And so once I do that, I'm able to go to the field a little bit more freely. And I'm very fortunate that I have great support from my supervisor, as well as our project leader, state supervisor, basically, and my colleagues too. So sage-grouse work keeps us busy. And then we kind of move into wolf tracking season. And I'm always coordinating with ODFW. I try to coordinate as much as possible with Bureau of Land Management and the Forest Service locally. And we have a host of volunteers who come out and help track wolves as well. So once we kind of wrap up with sage-grouse season, we're getting into wolf denning season. And that's when their life history becomes a little bit more sedentary while the female's denning and has pups that are young and not super mobile. So those are typically the best times to kind of hone in on their concentrated areas of activity near dens. And that actually is very helpful for us when, making recommendations about different projects. So that is currently happening right now. So for instance, next week I'm going out to track, and I think people think it sounds a lot more exciting than it actually is, because I spend a lot of time driving, getting out of the truck, walking around, looking for tracks. I'll walk up and down roads. I check intersections. I check my cameras. And for the record, in all of this time tracking since, really 2017 with a gap in between, I've only seen one wolf with my eyeballs in Central Oregon. Yeah, they're very good at not being seen. And they must know I'm coming. They have to know what I smell like at this point. Oh, it's this chick again. So yeah, field work can be kind of erratic depending on what I have going on in the office, but I try to keep it as consistent as possible because checking cameras is super important. And eagle stuff, different ball game, right? Like we do eagle nest checks, or I do site visits for potential projects so I can give them more concise recommendations. Bat stuff I've not been involved with a lot lately, but bat stuff can entail doing exit counts for bats and various cave systems. And really what I do is I'm kind of ancillary, and I let, the Forest Service, the BLM, and the local bat hub here take lead on that. And so I just offer my help and assistance where needed.
Wow. I have so many questions about, bats and grouse and all of that, but I could ask hundreds of questions about sage-grouse too, but I'm going to restrain myself. But
they're really cool birds.
I know grouse are honestly my favorite, particularly dusky grouse. But one question maybe more related to wolves and grouse. I know Oregon has a pack. Is it named the Grouse Flats Pack? Is that a thing?
That sounds familiar. Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there's been any documented predation.
So the Grouse Flats Pack is in Wallowa County. So that's actually outside of our
I see. Okay.
Jurisdiction, basically.
Mm-hmm.
So our jurisdiction is more or less Highway 395 that bisects the state. And everything west of that is the federally listed portion of Oregon. So everything east of 395 is both federally and state delisted. And so the state manages wolves over there. We're totally hands off with that.
So what's the area, just give everybody the area then or the topography, if you can, of what you're in charge of? Because if we're looking at, obviously we not discard, but we're taking out of account the eastern portion of the state of what you're talking about. What does it look like from your perspective in terms of topography? What does the land look like? I've been to Oregon a couple of times. It's very green. The forests are lush. What are you looking at as you go out there and you're doing your work?
Well, the valley and places west of the Cascades are very green and lush. So our office boundary covers the crest of the Cascades all the way down to the northern portion of Klamath County, which is one of the lower southernmost counties in South Central Oregon. There's a piece carved out for a different Fish and Wildlife Service region, and they handle a lot of the Klamath Basin area. So we cover the crest of the Cascades. Our field office covers the crest of the Cascades, and that's as far north as the Columbia River on the northern border of Oregon. And I cover 3 counties up there. And then as far east as, I assume listeners are not familiar with all the counties in Oregon, but we basically cover more or less a third of Central Oregon, from the Columbia River down to the Oregon-California and Oregon-Nevada border. But most of our Klamath office covers the area in South Central Oregon that borders along California. So we just have a little sliver of the Oregon-California border and more of a chunk of the Oregon-Nevada border. And then all the way east to most of Harney County we cover as well. It's a big area. Yeah.
It's a big area. I was going to say it's a big area.
And so as you move from the crest of the Cascades, it's very green. You have a lot of different types of coniferous forests, but it's a huge gradient in terms of precipitation. I think it's one of the larger gradients in the world, from a higher precip area to a very low precip area. So as soon as you get out of the Cascades proper, you're into kind of like the dry pine ponderosa forest, and then you're moving into sage steppe rangeland big time, and that is almost exclusively the rest of our office boundary.
Wow. So where do the populations of wolves live in Oregon? I'm sure they have strongholds and then places they travel through infrequently, but where kind of are the main primary areas?
Yeah, so we have, a number of new areas of known wolf activity within our office boundary. And as you, I'm sure, well know, wolves initially established in Northeast Oregon and have since been dispersing and establishing new territories in Central Oregon. So we have 11 areas of known wolf activity just from the Cascades over to the listing boundary of Highway 395. Those areas of known wolf activity. Some are very large, right? There's a solitary wolf who has a very large territory. Others are much more concentrated, and we primarily find them in forested habitats. So we have, they're kind of filling in the crest of the Cascades. all along from north to south. And then we have some in like the Summer Lake area. And I mean, these maps are available online, so folks can go look on Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's website to see where those areas of known wolf activity are in relation to where folks are living in Oregon and hear this podcast. So yeah, they are currently expanding and establishing in many areas in Central Oregon.
So what are the primary methods of counting populations in Oregon?
So ODFW handles the wolf counts at the end of the year. We provide information for those wolf counts. The primary ways are kind of myriad, and I know Aaron Bott probably spoke to this a little bit, but my primary way of contributing to that is providing them with trail camera data. Unless I'm actually out tracking and I feel confident that a set of tracks belongs to, say X number of wolves, right? I've only run into that scenario maybe twice where I feel confident there are definitely 3 wolves using this road currently. You can see them all walking side by side. So primarily it's trail camera data. And then ODFW has other methods for determining stuff. I'm not quite sure what they do in Northeast Oregon. Similar stuff, right? Tracking trail cameras, and they likely fly looking for GPS collared animals. And they'll also count them opportunistically. So for instance, if they're flying deer or elk surveys and happen to run into wolves, they will count those. So that's eyes on wolves. And it is the minimum number of known wolves, right? So we're just counting the number of wolves either we have via trail cameras, via ODFW confirmed data, however that is collected. So like I said, primarily I contribute to that via trail camera information.
So what's the trail camera technology you use look like? I mean, it takes photos, videos, it gets tripped by movement, I assume. Does it have remote viewing? I mean, is it pretty standard stuff, or does it collect any unusual information?
It's great, right? Trail cameras have really, in terms of technology, progressed in the past few years. I have a few different brands of trail cameras. All of them are very similar and perform very similar functions. And really, normally what I do is I set it to video. Personally for me, I prefer videos. One, it's kind of like looking into the private lives of animals a little bit. You can see some of their interesting behaviors, goofy, endearing behaviors sometimes too. And I don't get just wolves, obviously. I get a lot of different species. I have a great one of 2 bull elk sparring in front of my camera, late March. Bears, bear cubs trying to nurse while mom's walking down the road, all kinds of things. So the videos are usually what I go with. Technology is great. They always, I double check everything because I'm very paranoid about putting an SD card in a trail camera and coming back a month later and not having anything on it.
Yeah, exactly.
It is I try very hard not to have that happen. And things can and do happen. I've had cameras vandalized and stolen, certainly. I try to put them in areas that aren't very conspicuous, but it happens, to everybody, certainly not just me. They don't know whose camera that is. They're just like, I don't want to see this here. And, subsequently make poor decisions. So
you have to go check the SD card. You can't, there's no remote.
There are cellular trail cameras and they are amazing. They're pretty awesome. And so ODFW just purchased a few of those, and I am borrowing one currently from Wildlife Services. They let me borrow it. And
cool.
I just haven't found a really good place to put it out because I don't want to put it out and, run up their bill with a bunch of photos of, cars going by or animals that aren't specifically what we're looking for, in this case, wolves.
Yeah,
cool.
Exactly. Why do you think, or is there any scientific reasoning for why, obviously wolves are making their way down into this part for you? Obviously that has to be exciting for your field office that they're in your corridor now and you guys can study them. Are they, I assume the prey base is the same, right? Elk, deer, what are most of the prey that they're looking for? Is it just they're getting more comfortable? What's the reasoning for the shift? And obviously wolves move, so they go 40, 50 miles. But what have you guys seen, if there's anything that leads you to believe why they would be making the move and spreading themselves out a little bit more?
Let's see. That is that's a great question. Anything I say will be speculative about this, but I mean, Northeast Oregon has a lot of wolves. They do disperse. And so ultimately, we're getting wolves dispersing from Northeast Oregon and other areas, and they're establishing in Central Oregon. And they follow the elk. They like elk. A lot of their diet is comprised of elk. And so that's more or less what we're seeing, is that they're dispersing from other areas of the state, establishing in Central Oregon, and primarily following the elk around. Anything more than that, I think, would be probably someone's master's thesis or PhD dissertation. I think Aaron is very interested in looking at wolf dispersal across the state, actually.
What about, average pack sizes in Oregon? Is that data that exists?
Average pack size is probably around 4 to 5 wolves.
So smaller in those areas then, yeah. When you say wolf activity, or like what was it, 11, you saw like 11 hits of wolf activity. Is that simply just wolves moving? Well, like what are you using to track those movements? And then obviously trail cameras and stuff like that. But what are the data points, I guess, that you're getting from those movements of activity?
Yeah. So once again, ODFW makes those what are called areas of known wolf activity, or AQUAs, as we call them. And really, I think people underestimate how hard it is to find wolves. It's hard. Like I said, I've only seen one with my eyeballs in Central Oregon. And so what we really rely on, what ODFW really relies on, is people submitting wolf reports. That's a huge, huge lift for both ODFW and for us, right? We get those wolf reports in the listed portion of the state, and we will follow up on them. But that's a really good starting point. If you get a credible wolf report, even better, one that has a photo with a scale for track or scat, or actually a photo of a wolf, those are really good places to start looking for wolves. Sometimes people are reporting on wolves that are just dispersing through, and that can kind of be a shot in the dark, right? Like if it's just one wolf dispersing through an area, you're not likely to see that animal again. But if you start to get concentrated reports of wolves in an area, absolutely worth investigating. And so what we do after that is then put cameras out. And then if we start to get concentrated areas of activity of wolves, then we can maybe discuss trapping wolves. And that is ODFW is the lead on that. So they do all of the wolf trapping, even in the listed portion of the state. And then once you get a GPS collar on a wolf, then you have a much better feel for where that particular animal is moving. Doesn't necessarily correspond to where the rest of the pack is moving. It depends on what age the animal is that you collar. Like, for instance, if you collar a yearling male, that male is likely to potentially wander off and disperse. We collared a female last year who subsequently dispersed further south in November. But we had a pretty good feel for the area that her and her pack used. And so ODFW was able to develop a more precise area of known wolf activity, because initially they can start out as just circles on the map. And I think you can see that pretty clearly online with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's maps that they provide.
I feel like we left something out with your lone experience of seeing a wolf with your own eyes. Like what was that like? When did that happen? How did that go for you?
That's a good story, actually. So I was with an ODFW staff / friend, and I was interested in checking out this female, the Upper Deschutes female that ODFW collared. I was looking at her locations and wondering what she was doing in that particular area. And so we went to check out the area and get out of the car. We see wolf tracks, 2 sets. So there are 2 wolves, and one set is significantly larger than the other. And we walked down the road and came across some drag marks in the road. It was weird. And there was black hair in the road and feathers everywhere. And this ODFW employee, she walked behind a pile of timber and found the animal that the wolves had been feeding on, and it was a pig. No idea how that pig got out there. Our best guess is that it was dumped out there. There are no feral pigs in this area, and carcass disposal is expensive, and sometimes I think folks just put carcasses other places. So they had been eating on a pig and had killed a large bird as well, is our hypothesis, right? We're not 100% certain on that, but it's very likely that a bird landed, had a big meal, and was unable to fly away. I think it's fairly common. This has happened before. We get a lot of calls about eagles that can't fly. And more often than not, if I go out to try to catch the eagle, it flies away very lethargically and slowly, doesn't have a lot of lift, but more often than not, they've had a big meal and they're kind of just digesting and they can't fly very well. So the pig carcass was pretty clean. All of the bones were still there, and wolves will go back and eat all of those bones. Great food. Bone marrow is awesome. And so we kind of turned around and just started walking back to the truck, and we had been very quiet up until that point, and we started chatting a little bit more loudly, and all of a sudden this dog / oh, that's a wolf gets up probably 15 feet away from us, and we just stopped dead in our tracks. We were so surprised, and the wolf gets up. It had been sleeping presumably, and it looks at us. It walks up the hill, looks at us again, and then trots away. And we were both so stunned. I think we stood there for a solid 5 minutes. Like, what just happened? And we went over to where it had been resting, and there were these little divots in the dirt that it had presumably dug out that followed the shade of where the tree was providing shade. So it would, I don't know, this is just my assessment, and my friend from ODFW, her assessment as well, that it follows the shade, and so it kind of digs out a little bed for itself, gets sunny in that area, hot, moves to the next shady area. And that was pretty good. One of those private lives of animals, once again. So that was my saw a wolf with my eyeballs experience. I mean, I've seen now currently a wolf that has been collared, but those are two very different experiences in my opinion.
So you said that was the only experience you'd had over the course of time, but how long had you been working on wolves before that happened?
So I've been working on them more or less since 2017. When I first started, I worked with our wolf biologist and would go out and I would help him track. I would write policy documents for the service related to wolves. And then once he went to a different branch, I was tasked with being the wolf lead for our field office. So each field office within Fish and Wildlife Service in Oregon has a lead for wolves. And so I correspond with those folks regularly. But yeah, more or less since 2017, I've been the wolf lead since 2022.
So what does that entail? Because what is being a wolf? Because when you say write policy, people I would think would in their heads imagine a number of different things, like you're sitting at a typewriter with your glasses down on the thing. So when you're writing policy, are you literally writing federal policy from the Bend office? What do you mean by that? It's
so basically our branch, Ecological Services, we work a lot with federal agencies in the Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act realm. So a lot of Forest Service and Bureau of Land Management consultation for projects that they have coming down the pipe that might impact a threatened or endangered species. And so those are the policy documents to which I refer. And that's really the bread and butter of our field office, and our job in particular is working with those federal agencies and others, right? It's not the only thing we do. It's very varied. It's hard to distill it into just a few sentences. But yeah, so a lot of that is oriented towards Section 7 consultation with federal agencies on their actions.
Got it. I want to get to the High Desert Museum that you were a part of with Ronan, and we interviewed, I believe, a couple of the other members, Austin Smith. We interviewed Austin Smith Jr. Sorry, and just what is it like to be a part of something like that? Because we're talking about folks from multiple different parts of typically, I guess, the wolf spectrum, where you have photography and film, field work with yourself. Austin is field work. When you're part of a panel like that, what does it say that you're in it, that you're a person that was selected to be a part of that and to explain about the work that's being done with wolves, and you're part of Fish and Wildlife, and so that you have this great spectrum of folks who are so knowledgeable and intelligent to speak to the general public and give them the information that they probably crave and that they won't really get anywhere else?
Yeah, one, I was very flattered that they thought to ask me. Just for the listeners, I didn't study wolves in school. That was never something that, I mean, I'm pretty sure I was a starry-eyed student at one point that thought I want to work with carnivores, because almost everybody has that dream, right? But I am not into competing for those types of things. Competition makes me anxious, actually, a little bit. Trivia night in particular. But I studied mice in grad school. And so when my supervisor asked if I would like to help our wolf biologist with work, and then subsequently later on asked if I would like to be the wolf lead, I was very flattered that she thought to ask. And I very much love what I do right now. A lot of that is relationships. And I suspect that is probably why the museum and Ronan were amenable to having me on the panel. We work very closely with the Warm Springs tribes. I work very closely with ODFW, as do a number of other agencies and the tribes in Central Oregon. And so I think it would have been weird to not have them up there talking as well. And so I'm glad it was the group that it was. And Cameron Krebs, I had met him for the first time at the High Desert Museum panel, and he's great. I loved listening to him talk and share his experiences. But yeah, and each one of us has very different experiences. We work for different agencies, or we come from different areas. And so we each have kind of, I think, unique things to offer. But the primary thing for that was really, I think, meant to highlight the relationships and how important those are. Those are really, I kind of say Section 7 is the bread and butter of my job, but relationships are really the bread and butter of most wildlife work, if not all. I mean, the stuff I say here about wolves in terms of relationships with other people applies broadly to all of the species.
What are those working relationships like? It seems to be there has to be a lot of communication. There has to be a lot of back and forth. Obviously, you work closely with ODFW, but for you, as you sit here, we're going on 7-8 years in this particular post for you. What are you learning day by day, I guess, of learning about these relationships, about how unique they are, and what it actually means to ensure that wildlife and everything gets taken care of the way it should?
I can't underscore how big of a deal it is to have good working relationships and just good relationships in general. I think that event, the panel, was a really good opportunity to kind of highlight our day-to-day work, but also show how interconnected the various agencies are when it comes to wolves, right? It helps also, I think, lend some humanity to the whole conversation. It's easy to think certain things about people you don't know anything about. And having those connection and realizing my mantra, as well as the answer is always no if you don't ask, is the Venn diagram overlaps somewhere, right? Like, even if you don't agree with someone or don't share the same background or whatever, gestures broadly, like, there is going to be some place where you have some common ground, and it might not even be related to wildlife at all. But finding that common ground, I think, is super important, and just lending humanity to each person, right? Like, and then you can start to have those conversations that might be a little spicy, but you can have those in a mutually respectful way, instead of having to be adversarial. I think it's also a really good opportunity for folks to meet their local wildlife biologists, whether that's ODFW, the Confederated Tribes of the Warm Springs, and Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, and BLM also have great wildlife biologists with whom we work regularly. And I think it really kind of highlights how important those are. And, like effective wildlife and conservation and management across various boundaries like public land and private land really benefits, once again, when folks have these good working relationships, right? Like wildlife don't understand borders. They're not like, oh, hey, I got to stay on Forest Service land and not go onto this private property, and vice versa, right?
And what are the common tools you're seeing in Oregon that ranchers are utilizing to essentially mitigate conflict?
Yeah, so we and ODFW attend a lot of depredation committee meetings. So each county in Oregon has a wolf compensation and depredation committee. And those committees have to be in place in order for producers to be compensated for any losses. A lot of that is focused on preventative stuff, right? So fladry is one of those that can be used as a reactive or preventative thing, right? Like if you have a pasture where you know you're going to be calving, you might think about putting up some fladry to deter wolves. And it's not a forever thing, right? Like fladry has to be taken down after a period of time, but it is and can be very effective. Fox lights are another thing. And certainly these things are applicable in pastures that are smaller. It gets a little bit more difficult when you have bigger pastures or just they're out on allotments. And then we really encourage the use of range riders big time, just folks checking in with their livestock, whether it's them or someone they hire. And so the depredation and compensation committees can actually compensate producers for those dollars as well that they use for range riders. Livestock guardian dogs also are something we recommend within reason, right? Like dogs are expensive to purchase and train and feed. And once again, the depredation committees can absolutely help producers with the costs of those. And once again, those have applicability in certain scenarios, but not all. And so it's good to have kind of a suite of tools, if you will, for folks to kind of pick and choose from what works best for them, because everyone is going to be different, right? There are going to be some really big operations where a lot of this stuff doesn't apply, and there are going to be some small operations where some, but not all of this applies. And so we really just want to convey how many different tools there are and that they can get help funding these types of preventative things as well.
And I think I read there's no legal take by sportsmen.
Correct. In the whole state, in fact. ODFW in the delisted portion of the state handles all of that, and they can issue permits depending on a variety of things and very specific to each scenario. That's something that is fully within their wheelhouse. We have nothing to do with that. And as for the federally endangered portion of the state, you are correct. There is no legal take of wolves at all.
And so if you had a wolf, if you were a rancher and you had a wolf that was continually predating on your livestock, you could file for some kind of permit to lethally manage.
Only in the federally delisted portion of the state. That is not an option in the federally listed portion of the state.
Okay, that clears that
up.
Yeah. So then they would have to get some form of non-lethal flagery, foxlight, squat box, whatever it is, to handle that problematic predator, whatever it is. Yeah. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. And is there a program through which you provide those tools to folks, or they have to acquire them privately?
No, I mean, we provide them. So our field office has flagery, and I've purchased fox lights for people that I loan out. For instance, I have probably 16 fox lights loaned out currently to different producers in the area. We put up flagery with the help of ODFW. Wildlife Services also puts up flagery. So it's definitely a multi-agency, kind of all hands on deck effort. And then the depredation committees also have the ability to purchase these supplies and kind of hold them. We've been encouraging them to purchase them and kind of have somewhat of a checkout system. But also, I wouldn't ask someone to put up flagery by themselves for the first time. So we would absolutely come out and help them and show them how to do that. And are happy to do that. So, ODFW has a lot of these supplies and they do a lot of this work. Fish and Wildlife Service field office have these supplies, and Wildlife Services also have some of these supplies, and as well as the depredation and compensation committees in each county.
Oh, that's great. I love the fact that there's such communication and collaboration across all departments and all these different people. That's great.
Yeah, it takes a village, right? Like, it doesn't eliminate conflict, right? We still have to deal with that, but it does help really pave the road for conservation and helping folks who need it and want it.
So, I mean, what for you, Emily, like what are next steps or next things that are happening for you specifically? Is it just the typical? No, I don't want to say typical, because obviously all the things that you get to do and get your hands in, literally. Is there any new exciting things coming from U.S. Fish and Wildlife in Oregon in the Bend office? Is it business as usual? Any new panels that you're going to be on? Anything that you're going to be invited to? Like what's going on for you in the future in terms of, wolves or anything else?
No upcoming panels, but Ronan did do his exhibit, traveled to Eugene, so his photography exhibit. And I know you had him on this podcast. That traveled to Eugene, and the museum there, amazing folks, they also wanted to do something similar. And I do believe Ronan insisted that he have the same panel. And so all of us got back together again and had another great conversation. That was awesome. Different demographic of human as well. So I was glad that we were able to go to Eugene and have those conversations too. Really the main thing right now is finding wolves. That's the big thing, particularly right now before they start to get into like a bit of a more nomadic phase. Female whelps her pups mid-April, and right now they're being weaned, and then come mid to end of July, they're a little bit more mobile and start to move away from their den and will be in their rendezvous area. And then kind of come fall, they can scatter to the wind. And so it's a lot more difficult to find them. So pinning down their activities now is a lot easier than trying to do it in the fall. So that's what we're currently doing. That's like the big thing on my plate for wolf related work. We're always collecting information, and I know ODFW might have a few things coming down the pipe for them, but I can't speak specifically to what ODFW has going on. So really right now it's attending a lot of these depredation and compensation committee meetings when I can, and then looking for wolves, doing outreach, right? So Aaron does a lot of it. He's exceptional at it. He's a great human. He is, every time I hear him talk, I just feel like such a cave troll. He's so articulate and so well-spoken, and I have learned just so much from him. I am forever grateful that he is the Central Oregon ODFW wolf biologist. He is a friend now. And so a lot of our work basically just entails a lot of coordination. I'll send updates to various agencies about, hey, we have this going on. If folks want to help, that would be great, because, tracking and checking trail cameras can be very time intensive. And so once again, it takes a village. It's an all hands on deck thing. And I just have to balance that with the other species with which I work, right? So my eagle work, my sage-grouse work, bats, and kind of a variety of other things, but those are the big ones, the big four.
Do you know of certain, in your specific area, in the area with which you guys cover, are there specific rendezvous sites that you guys are trying to look out for with the wolves that are there, or is that more an ODFW situation? We were talking about like trying to track them. Do you guys have an idea of where they rendezvous some of the time? Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
Definitely. For some of the areas of known wolf activity, we have a pretty good feel for where they hang out. We try not to bother them when they're doing that. We don't want to bump them from places, right? But having a good feel for where they are has been helpful for us. And we can rely on sometimes caller data to help inform that as well. But in general, we don't necessarily go searching for rendezvous or den locations, and have sometimes kind of happened upon them. Primarily is just getting a good feel for where are there areas of activity, and that will help ODFW kind of frame where new areas of wolf activity might show up on the landscape as well.
I know you say you use trail cam a lot in terms of getting information, video of where wolves are. Do you guys ever use helicopters or go aerial to try and find, or is the terrain too thick? Is it not something that's conducive for something like that in order to find and track where the packs are going or where individual wolves are going? Like you were saying before, there was one lone wolf.
Yeah. That's a good question. I do know it's a lot easier in areas of Northeast Oregon where it's a bit more open. It's really hard to see much of anything in a forested habitat when you're in a helicopter or a fixed wing. We, as Fish and Wildlife Service employees specifically, don't go in helicopters or fixed wing airplanes to look for wolves. For instance, if we were doing a sage-grouse survey and happened to see a wolf, we would note that and then file a wolf report to ODFW. So that would be kind of like a coincidental sighting. And that did happen during sage-grouse flights. There was actually her first day as an ODFW technician, she saw a wolf on a kill from the helicopter. And I thought that was just so cool for her. Actually, I don't know if she was doing sage-grouse or deer stuff. She might have been doing deer or elk stuff, but it was her first day flying and she saw the coolest thing, I think. So no, we don't specifically do that, or ODFW can and does. And typically I think they do that from a fixed wing airplane using VHF, so very high frequency telemetry. That's one of the better ways to find them because GPS collars are useful. They tell you where a wolf has been, but not where it's going, right? And we don't get GPS collar fixes. Like it's not a live stream. It's just like one every 9 hours typically. Like some will give 4 fixes a day. Some will give 2 fixes a day. A lot of that really is to preserve battery life on the collar. If you up the number of fixes, you're going to burn through the battery a lot quicker. And it's a lot of time and effort that ODFW puts into getting GPS collars on wolves. So they do it opportunistically and they will intentionally go up and look. It really just depends on what they hope to find through those flights. So, but often opportunistically, right? If they're out counting elk and deer, they can and do see wolves. It's not super common in the forested areas, but you know, they filed the reports of when they see them. So, and they let us know too.
When you're talking about disseminating information and obviously the panels and things of that sort with Ronan are a great deal. For U.S. Fish and Wildlife, what are the best ways that you've seen over the course of your 7 or 8 years now that folks are able to get information about, you know, whether it's eagles or sage-grouse, bats, wolves? What's the best way that you've seen work over the course of your time there so that people can get the most information about whatever animal they're looking for? Is it simply going to the website and finding the tab, or what's something that's worked for you, even you personally, that you've seen so that people can get the information that they need on the specific animal they're looking for?
Yeah, so the website is great. Oftentimes ODFW will refer people to us and we do vice versa, right? Like they'll get calls about eagles and they'll say, oh, you should talk to Emily. I'll get calls about deer and I'll say, oh, you should talk to ODFW. That happens a lot, in fact. So I get emails forwarded to me or I'm CC'd in an email where ODFW says, hey, I'm CCing Emily Weidner here. She can help discuss eagles in this case. So a lot of it is certainly, you know, you can look up a lot of things online, but honestly, when folks call our office and we talk to them, or even just putting ourselves out there as local resources, I think that has been really, really helpful. For instance, I just got off the phone with Deschutes County and we're talking about eagle related stuff, and I'm the person they contact now for eagle related stuff. They know that's me and they'll send people to me as well. And I think that's really important. And we try very hard to be that resource for folks.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the best part is that if you're accessible, people will know, well, they'll run to you with more questions and more inquiries, which is incredible.
Definitely. Yeah. And then those people have other people they talk to and they'll say, oh, you should talk to this person from Fish and Wildlife Service, or you should talk to this person from ODFW, right? I send a lot of people to ODFW for questions I absolutely cannot answer. I mean, I've even sent you guys in this to ODFW for questions I couldn't answer. And once again, it just kind of builds upon those relationships, and, those once again help pave the road for conservation. And I think make people just kind of more aware of our day-to-day work experiences and what we do as Fish and Wildlife Service employees, and also what ODFW does as ODFW employees.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're all just human, and we're all trying to do, I think, the best that we can in terms of having these relationships, which clearly, you're killing it in spades with in aces, really what you're doing. Just two more things from me. When I think I did ask the future question, but if you were to give, I guess, a zoomed out view for anybody who's listening from your perspective as U.S. Fish and Wildlife, what's the future of Oregon wolves? As, like you say, they continue to disperse, they continue to do their thing. What are we looking at in, say, 5-10 years for wolves in that part of Oregon as they kind of make their way down and move along?
I try not to put animals in a box because they often promptly leave that box. So I don't know. I mean, my best educated guess is I would expect to see more wolves kind of establish in the area. How many? I don't know. That really depends on a lot of things. Prey, kind of areas that they want to hang out that are not super disturbed. Just so many different factors go into that. But yeah, I mean, I would expect wolves to continue to establish in Central Oregon for sure. And I would expect the current wolves that are established to kind of refine their territories, and those will change through time as well as other wolves bump into those territory boundaries. That's my best guess for wolves in 5 years in Oregon. There are just going to be some places where they won't establish, right? Like it's going to be hard for them to find prey and water, for instance, in many parts of the sagebrush steppe. So I wouldn't really expect them to spend an inordinate amount of time hanging out there. So they're going to want to follow food, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I know in Northern California, we've had a lot of wolves getting down there, and I think we're up to 4 or 5 packs now, I want to say.
They're very good at traveling long distances. It very consistently amazes me, even me, where I'm thinking there's no way it could be. We have a report of it over here yesterday, and now it's all the way over here. And yeah, that is a thing. I mean, they can hustle when they want to. It's truly impressive, the distance that they can cover.
I think it's always one thing whenever I'm giving a tour at the sanctuary, and I go, oh yeah, they could go 40, 50 miles at a clip, and people are stunned. And I go, yeah. I said, they got to move. They got to do what they have to do to survive.
They're very good at it, particularly the ones that are kind of just on walkabout, really. Like they're figuring out their place in life. Those movements are big, big movements. I mean, you see the movements from Oregon to California. Those are impressive.
It's unbelievable. I can't thank you enough for the amount of information that you gave us, for all the work that you're doing with all the different species. I mean, wolves, one of them, but boy, you have like I said, your hands are in so much stuff. My final question for you, Emily, is when you hear the word wolf, what's the thing that comes to your mind?
Oh man, that's a good question. The pregnant pause right here of thinking. Just given the amount of time I spend looking for wolves in the forest, I think of forested environments. I just like this flash of the typical places that I have them on my cameras and those types of habitats. That's the thing that first comes to mind, and where they live, the private lives of animals, frankly. It's very interesting to be privy to some of those moments, and I'm thankful for them.
I love that. I really love, and Stephen's right, I love the long pause. That's always good. We're going to leave that in.
Yeah, I try not to fill the space with even though I know it's definitely slipped out. Or like, I say like a lot. We have a like jar at home I put quarters into.
That's awesome. I love it. Emily Weidner, thank you so much again for your patience, your dedication, and really all that you're doing up there in Oregon. Thanks so much for coming on with Stephen and I.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate your patience as well and the opportunity to have a conversation with you guys.
Thank you.
Alice Steele out there, and we'll be with you next time. Bye, everybody. Looking for more information about Wolf Connection or the podcast? Please visit our website at wolfconnection.org, where you can donate, sponsor a wolf, or become a volunteer.